Welcome to Shift, a college admissions ACT, SAT, and CLT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have affordable ACT and CLT courses that include everything you need to ace your exam. A full textbook, tons of review questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, videos on key topics, a built-in study planner, and full-length practice exams. You can get a free trial by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to get 10% off. Now, let's get started. Today, we have MissStudy with us, who I don't know if you go by that or if you go by your sort of the name given to you by your parents, right? But I would love if you could introduce yourself and your business.
Yes. So my name's Yasiara Ortiz, and I do go by MissStudy. It's just easy to remember. And what we do, because I have a whole team, is we really empower our students to find out what their mission is and then realize what university in the world, yes, I said in the world, is a better fit for them. So we have students studying all over the world, in the States, in Canada, in Europe, in Asia, in Australia. And it's I used to run the international department of admissions for a European university, Politecnico di Milano, and then I studied in the States. So very naturally, just people started asking me, "Hey, Yasi, so you have all these languages, you have all this mix, you were raised in New York, and you went to, you studied at a great university, and then you've worked internationally. Like, tell me, what would my life look like if I went to study in Italy or Canada or whatever it is?" So that's how the business started. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, that's great. And so, I think to start things off, so today the topic is talking about international students applying to the US, right? Which is a fair chunk of your clients. And, I think to start this off, right, the first thing I say, which is I think something that we've talked about a fair bit on this podcast, is just like, yes, of course you can apply to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and Stanford, but those are very hard to get into, especially as an international student, right? So if you're an international student looking at the United States university list or market or however you want to call it, what are some of the recommendations you give for how to start parsing through what is often like a pretty mammoth thing?
Yeah. So an interesting fact is that we have a very international pool of students. And in the US, about 70% of students who apply are coming from China and coming from India. And these are countries where they're very good at test scoring. They're excellent. They get amazing grades. So a lot of times they'll be like, okay, so I have the test scores, right? I have the grades. Now, when it starts becoming tricky is the part of speaking about you, right? And a lot of these, it's a lot about test taking. So that's when we have other students coming from LATAM who have that personality. Maybe their grades are not that high, but then they have the personality touch. So what I always explain to my international students is, hey, this is a really complete application. It's not just about your grades. It's also about what you're bringing to the university, what type of ambassador you're going to be. So a lot of times students, coming from abroad, they've seen the movies. I mean, they saw Spider-Man campus on Columbia. That's pretty cool. They've seen like the really like cool people like walking on American campuses. So they'll be like, oh, that's what I want. So they'll be very keen as to, they'll go on rankings. And as you said, okay, Harvard, Yale, Stanford. And what we do, our role is to also say, okay, those are options. Let me explain what those mean, what they would bring to you. And again, depending also on what your goals are, what other options can we take a look at? I like to have different types of plans. Also, coming from abroad, I mean, peso mexicano is different from the dollar. Like there's also a financial component, right? So if you're looking for scholarships, what are some of the colleges that are more generous in terms of providing scholarships to international students? And some colleges are very generous, and some others are they have very limiting budget in terms of budget. By the way, we have so there's a really cool resource that I wanted to mention, and I'm going to mention it right now just so that people know. Like we have a resource so that a timeline in terms of applying to colleges. What does it mean? How to get ready? More so because for international students, there's a visa component and there are other things
Mhm.
they should be looking at. So that's we'll add the resource. I mean, I think we can add a link, right, to the bio. And I mean, the resource is
Yeah, we can add it to the description for this,
yeah.
so we'll do that.
So that's going to be a really cool resource for any student who's thinking of studying here. Like, okay, where do I start, and how much time do I need in order for me to start?
Hmm. Yeah, no, that sounds great. And additionally, I think so look for that in the description if you're listening. I'll add it to the description of this podcast. But in addition to talking about sort of timeline, I think it's important to kind of go over the admissions process because the admissions process looks a little different if you're coming in from outside the country.
Hmm. That's right. So, what's most students who are applying to the US, obviously, they're aware that they have to have a high level of English, and they're going to have to present a test that shows that they're fluent in English. Now, what's really cool, Tyler, is that think about this. The economy, international students are interesting to the American economy. I mean, just last year, international students contributed to 40 billion dollars. So that's some money. So there are a lot of universities who are now offering special programs for international students. What does it mean? If your English level is not that high, you're like, oh God, I don't know if I'm going to get the minimum TOEFL level that they're requiring, then there's a way for you to, inside a university, they'll do your application, they'll take a look at all your grades, and if everything looks good, it's just a matter of the English. Then they'll give you inside the university, they'll have courses specialized for international students. So it's like doing like a pre-program where they get up to speed with English. And it's not just about the talking, it's also about, okay, how do I
Hmm.
write an essay? Maybe my country, like I have this a lot with my Latin students. I mean, Latin American students, they like to talk a lot. They will write a paragraph that is just one sentence. And so they're just used to writing that way. So it's also about understanding what is the writing style here. Okay, so there's the exam component. Also, because universities are interested in attracting these international students, sometimes, now this is a big sometimes, they'll have an SAT or ACT waiver, which I know for some students it's like, yay, that's amazing. So what that means is they'll have special classes for these international students. So a lot of times you'll find actually departments inside the university where they have a whole department specialized for these international students. So also what's cool about that is international students, this is the first time you're far away from your home. Maybe you're missing your food, maybe you're missing your language, maybe you're missing the way you socialize back at home. So this is a place where international students can find themselves, where they can go over academics, anything they need to be up to speed so that they can continue their studies with the rest of the class, the rest of Americans. So there's a standardized test, and then the application per se is very similar. I mean, you'll have essays, which I really recommend you do, and you start ahead of time. That's another thing. Just to give you an example,
Right.
uh, in order for you to apply to a university, just let's make this up. You're interested in applying to the Europe, right? So colleges
Right.
here in the States, application deadlines, we know November 1st is a big deadline, right? December is a big deadline. Now in Europe, you could basically wait until May or sometimes even June for a program that starts in August, right? So a lot of
Hmm.
international students are just used to that, so they're used to waiting for last minute, and that's one of the things that I find. A lot of times they'll come to me, yes, I want to apply to Harvard, and we're October 30th. I'm like, what do we do, right? It's a little bit late. So just make sure that you understand that it takes time. Make sure that you understand that preparing for exams takes time, and then the way you write essays is very different. Like I tell them usually what they call in other countries personal statement. It's very matter of fact, Tyler. Okay, what is it that you want to
Right.
study? What do you want to do? What are you going to get out of the degree? I mean, it's so different
Mm-hmm.
from imagine if you died yesterday and you left something behind, what would you be remembered by? And these are the types of essays that we get in American colleges. It's a lot about inspiration. So that's also very different. So
Mm-hmm.
start your essays ahead of time. And then it's not
Right.
over.
Well, and I think you touched on like an important thing there, which is like there's the culturalization of the essay, which is not necessarily to say like oh like writing in proper English. It's about like what do American colleges want to see culturally, and it's like hopes and dreams and like vision for your future as opposed to being more like brass tacks like some other places.
Mhm. Yes, that's right. And so that's where the research is really, really important because if you just write an essay about how taking again the Harvard example, how you're applying to Harvard because it's really well ranked, well, duh. I mean, everyone knows that. The research is really understanding how you fit in. And a lot of these colleges are very proud. I mean, I think out of all the countries I work with, the the proudness of being an alum is very strong in the States. I mean, here this is where the culture where we first started having t-shirts with the name of the schools, right? This is where you go to a networking event and people will ask you, where did you go to school? Now that's very different. In Europe, not really, they don't really ask you that. So there's this big sense of a family here in the States, a big sense of networking, which is also very different. So it's important when you're choosing a school, make sure that that networking is really going to support you more so if you're looking to stay in the States, which is what a lot of these international students are looking to do.
Great. Yeah, and I mean, I think that it is important to recognize the competitiveness of this from an international student point of view, right? Particularly for the top American colleges. I think that quite a lot of international students apply. Do you feel like international students applying, it's more competitive? Like obviously, I think for things like Harvard, etc., it's going to be hyper competitive no matter what. But even for schools that are not in like the upper echelon of American universities, I feel like just being from an international background puts you in a different and more competitive pool than the domestic students. Is that correct?
Mm, But it all depends also what the university is looking for, because now there's a lot of talk of diversity, and in many, I mean, sometimes there's also a business decision. I mean, an
Mm-hmm.
international student pays more than a local student.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an interesting fact. In the last few years, some countries have been very aggressive about recruiting international students. Some of them are like Canada or United Kingdom. Now they're getting to a point that their universities are getting saturated with international students. Now the States still has a lot of room to grow. So there's a really from the university point of view, there's a real interest because there's from a domestic perspective, some people are just not going to college anymore. So they're looking and they're eager to attract those international students. So yes, it is competitive. And at the same time, I depending on the university, it could be also an advantage. You can use that as an advantage.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I think also, this kind of leads nicely into like another thing that's important to talk about, which is like tuition fees and then like what your scholarship options are as an international student. Because not
Hmm.
only are American universities incredibly expensive, often significantly more expensive than universities you'd find in your own country
Hmm.
already, like
Hmm.
multiple times more, they
Hmm.
also are, more expensive even more for international students, and I feel like scholarships are harder to get. And I'm curious,
Hmm.
what are your thoughts on that, and what advice do you have for people looking at that?
Okay, so the first thing is for international students to understand that they have a choice. What I mean by that is you have different types of ways of getting a degree that is that is that is more cost efficient. Like for example, a lot of international
Hmm.
students have never heard of community colleges, and they don't really understand how it
Hmm.
works. So basically, a community college, you could study 2 years of the core curriculum, and then transfer to a university, to another university, and you would get the degree of the university you transfer to. So at the end, that's really interesting for international students because that would make it more affordable. Then, so a community college could range any fees, again, as an international student, could be like $20,000 per year. Now, public universities who are getting funding, you have public universities very well ranked with great research opportunities that range from 25K to 35K per year. And then I'm just talking tuition prices. And then private universities,
Hmm.
anything start from 40K and all the way up. Now, in terms of scholarship, this is my recommendation. When you're applying to a university, make sure that you understand the opportunities that they have. Now, sometimes the universities, they'll have very specific scholarships. For instance, I was just applying to some schools here in Florida with a student from Eastern Europe, and they have a scholarship just for Eastern European students. I mean, that's very
Hmm.
specific. Harvard, for instance, they have a Harvard Arab Alumni Association scholarship, which provides scholarships to Arab students. You have Yale has international scholarships that offers need-based students up to $70,000 per year. Same thing with Boston University. They have scholarships for international students that cover 25K per year. So there are opportunities. So that's on the side of the university. Now, what's really interesting for international students is to also find out in their local country what are some programs that are sponsoring students to actually get a scholarship either from the government, their local government, to private
Hmm.
scholarships. And in some cases, I mean, you have some Arab countries where the government was paying everything, all of the studies. So that's like, wow, how is that? For us, it's like, wow, that's pretty cool, right? And some of
Hmm.
them might have conditions. Yes, I mean, we will pay for your education. You go study in the States and then you come back. Some of them don't have conditions. So just make sure that you find out also in your country what are some of those opportunities. So there are ways to financing your studies.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I think it's also important to look for scholarships that are not just for tuition, but also for other things like room and board or even like travel expenses, right? Which can be major expenses. And I mean, on that note, I feel like, this is when I think about, if I was ever to go to school abroad, the number one thing that would worry me would be like getting a living arrangement and dealing with like the visa situation, right?
Mhm.
And so, what is your advice for people getting over the hump with that? Because I'm sure it's not as scary as it looks, but it looks pretty scary. So that's always something that I would worry about.
So a lot of these international students, I mean, some countries are so used to asking for visas, even just for travel purposes. So they already,
Hmm.
it's not as scary maybe as an American because it just sounds different. And at the same time, what you need to do is you need to do it ahead of time. You need to have already an acceptance of the university. So once you have that acceptance of the university, you can follow the steps. You can contact fill out the paper form, contact the embassy, have an interview with the embassy. The embassy is just making sure that you're really going to the States to study, right? And then your visa will be, they'll give you approval, or they'll answer what the issue is. And then it's just, then you're off off to go. Now that
Hmm.
visa allows you to come to the States and study. You have to study full time, so it doesn't work for, oh, I'm just going to take, these online classes. It doesn't work. You need to show that that's your main activity. And you can also, with that visa, you can also work on campus up to 20 hours per week. I mean, you can do work at cafeteria, the library, whatever it is, right? And as a great advantage also for international students is you have the right to work off campus with what we call the OPT, which is the optional practical training, which means that
Hmm.
during, so once you graduate, right, you graduate and then you have up to 12 months for you to be able to work at a company like legally. Now, what's interesting is in last year, out of all the programs, the two most popular programs here in the States was computer science and business. The reason being is that for students who have a STEM designated program, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, that
Hmm.
OPT can extend to another 24 months. So that means you could work legally in the States for 3 years. And then either
Right.
that ends and then you go back home, or if you're really good and you can show that you're doing something that really that you're the only one who can do it, then you can get sponsorship for another type of a visa.
Great. Yeah, well, and I think it also, to me, it like tracks with the fact that, like we talked about before, coming to America for college is so expensive.
Mhm.
So, in order for that return on investment to make sense, you probably are going to be, looking to enter like one of the more lucrative American industries, which business and computer science, I think, are definitely up there.
Mhm.
Another big one, I think, is medical school, and that's another one where I think there's quite a lot of international students as well.
Yeah, medical school is so medical school, law school, also with architecture. It's important for you to understand the system, how it works here in the States, which is very different
Hmm.
to what you could find in Latin America, in Europe, or even in Asia. In these countries, when you
Hmm.
start, if you decide that medicine is your track, I mean, from day one in college, you're already in the medical like track. In the States, you have those
Hmm.
2 years uh, to basically a little bit play around, right? You can choose, you can only declare your major after the second year. That's okay. In a lot of these countries, they don't offer that flexibility. You already need to like say declare at 17 what it is that you're going to be majoring in. So also for international students, that's something I've had um, international students who love the fact that here in the States they have so much flexibility, and that makes it very attractive. Another component, Tyler, which is difficult for us to think about. You're comfy in California, I'm comfy here in my on the beach in Florida, is that a lot of many countries where these students are coming from, they're going through political unrest, they're going through economic crisis. I was just giving conferences in Ecuador, and they having electricity shortages, which for us is like, okay, well, the light goes out. No, it's not just the light. It's like you lose all the food in your fridge. There's no more internet. You can't do your homework online. So it's like going back to 20 years ago, or no, even like before that, right? So there's also a component of parents saying, I am willing to invest because this the way they see it, it's not just about education, it's about a life. I mean, talk about the American dream, right? It is about
Hmm.
building and offering my child a better future. Or maybe they're interested in doing a career that in their country is not is just doesn't exist, or maybe they're different from what the social norm asks them to be, so they are safer in a more welcoming country and multicultural and multiracial country like the States.
Right. Well, and yeah, I think it's important to kind of be prepared for a little bit, no matter where you're coming from, for a little bit of a culture shock, right? But at the end of the day, the good news is that generally universities are probably one of the most welcoming places in America, because everybody's kind of coming from somewhere, and a lot of times, yes, maybe you're from another country, but you're just well, I'm from Texas and you're from California and blah blah blah, and so like we're all kind of coming from different places anyway. But definitely be prepared for that. A little bit of a culture shock.
Yeah. I'll give you a fun anecdote. So I remember, and this was actually I was doing my master's in international affairs at Columbia University in New York, and one of the things that we had, of course, international affairs, a lot of international students, and they gave a whole class about plagiarism. So in many cultures, it's acceptable to just sort of copy things, and it's more informal. Now, here, Columbia made a real clear point as to what plagiarism was, and that could get the student kicked out. And also another interesting fact is when I have my European students, for instance, they're very used to a type of education where the uh, professor is talking and you listen and you take notes, and that's then you take your exam and that's about it. So here, when they come here and suddenly the grade, like 30% of your grade is participation, they're a bit like, oh, they have all this fear of talking in public or in front of people. What are people going to say? So it's interesting. It's just a
Right.
different way. But that's fun. I mean, that's the fun part of having different countries. Otherwise, it would be just having vanilla ice cream. I mean, the fun thing is we get to have all these flavors, right, Tyler?
Yeah. Well, and it's basically that I think that the whole point of the university experience, in my mind, is to get exposed to lots of different cultures and people and ideas. And so, yeah, I think that's all really well aligned. I want to just like return us also just to kind of like a couple more questions that I had, specific to international students applying into the U.S.
Mhm.
Because these are things that I've run into, even like with Achievable, because we have an internship program, which is maintaining your visa status.
Mhm.
And I was curious, what are like the key things you need to keep track of in maintaining your visa status? I feel like a lot of these visas also require either that you're like working at a summer internship, or maybe that's only after you're done with school. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
But I just would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, don't get arrested, right?
Well, yes.
So as long as you're a bit like abiding by the rules and you're bringing your energy and you're bringing your love to anything that you do, you're going to be fine. I mean, the visa, if you do decide to drop out of school, yes. I mean, the visa, basically what the university is doing is they're saying, okay, you are under us. So if you decide to drop out of school, if you decide like we no longer take responsibility for you, so then, your status might change, or if you decide to change your status when you're here in the States, you go like the green card, whatever it is. But otherwise, keeping the visa is pretty. It's just if you're at the same school, and even if you do decide to transfer, it's very easy. I mean, I've had students transfer from one school, and basically their visa just gets transferred from one school to the other. It's very normal to do that. So I think the issue is more with working, and that's where the OPT and my recommendation for students is don't wait until last minute. More so if you're an international student, like really start going to your career service, find out about what are some employers that are looking for specific skills that you might have, maybe a language. maybe something very specific. I'll give you an example. I think, yeah, it was where was it? A university, I think it was Birmingham University, in Alabama. Yes. So they had a whole department. This was interesting. They had a whole department for cyber terrorists. So to combat cyber terrorism, and the reason being was that one of their professors was able, at one point, Facebook was attacked cyberly, and he
Mhm.
was able to find out what was happening, and so Facebook gave them a bunch of money, and they had a whole like cybersecurity department. So they needed students, for instance, who knew certain languages, like very particular languages, like Arab or some strange dialects or very particular dialects spoken in certain countries that were more sensitive to to have like terrorist threats. Or so you probably like find out what are some of the skills of things that you can bring that are going to be interesting to companies, and also just be very proactive, go to the job fairs, get on that internship program, and do a lot of network. I mean, here, uh, it's and I'm really talking to my to the cultures that have a tendency to really just stay at the library and study, more like Asian cultures. Like, it is really important for you to get out there, because a lot of times you will land a job or you will make a connection not at the library, but even just playing pickleball or something as basic as that. So really get out
Right.
there, get out there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, hopefully, if you're trying to study abroad, it's because you are interested in living in that country, or at the very least, getting to experience what it's like to be a part of that country. And if you are in your room the whole time and then in classrooms or the library the whole time, that's not really the whole experience, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
and it, like you said, and I don't, maybe this is an American thing. I feel like it's kind of an everywhere thing, but it certainly is true in America. Very often, having strong connections with people is going to be better for your career, especially at the beginning where you don't really have that much to hang your hat on besides your school GPA and what school you went to, than a lot of things.
That's right.
And so building that is an important part of building your future.
That's right. That's right. And you might be surprised who you can meet in a social setting, and just also speaking with your classroom. What sometimes happens is that international students, they might gather around other international students, maybe for a language purpose, for they'll go eat their food, which is great. I mean, do that. And again, you're here in the States has so many opportunities and has so many options. And also for
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these students, when they come here, it's so beautiful, Tyler, because when they come here, it's not about them. They're carrying also the hopes of their um, parents, their siblings. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
times they're being seen as heroes. You're doing this, and so they have a lot of responsibility. And so, yeah, have fun. Like, get and the States is so different. I mean, New York is so different from Texas, so different from
Mm-hmm.
California. Even for us who live in the States, it's such a beautiful country to explore. And yeah, I love seeing my international students. I mean, I love seeing my international students. For instance, if they're in Texas, like go to a rodeo and really get into the and even speak with a Texan accent and be proud of it. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
beauty. I mean, that's the idea. The idea is for you to really thrive and give yourself also a chance, because a lot of times what happens is when you're back home, you have certain pressures. But again, the States is a country of freedom, and freedom of speech, and freedom of your experience, the type of experience you choose to have. So take advantage that you can have a place where you're sometimes it's good to be away from the family, take a little breather, and
Right.
really start learning who you really are. What are you about?
Right, exactly. And I think it's just like such a good opportunity for that, regardless of your family background, but especially, for a lot of people, it might be their first time being away from home, like at all.
Mm.
And so really, you're like really away from home, right? When you're going international. Um, well, great. I think this is all like, I mean, there's a ton of great information in this episode, and I'm really like happy with how it went. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to make sure you talked about before we wrap up?
For my international students, if you are serious about exploring studying it in the States, get ahead of time, do things with time, also get the right information. And there are three things that I usually hear are limitations for my international students. So one is the language skills, my English is not that great. Two, I don't have the finances. And three, maybe there's specific requirements that I don't have. Now, what I'm here to tell
Mhm.
you is that those are no limitations. If there are special programs for students who need to improve their English, there are special scholarships if that's something that you need. There are also special requirements. They'll be more flexible with your requirements. So if that's your dream, let's make it happen. And I've had some amazing stories of people who've turned around their lives, came to the States, are now doing not just studying, but then are they got married here, they started their life, they're doing amazing things at in engineering companies. I have so many examples of really successful and beautiful stories. So if you really choose to explore this, let's explore it because there's some really cool options. And I'm Tyler, I'm a mix. I was born in Colombia. My mom's French Colombian. My dad's from Spain. I grew up in New York, and I really love our country. I really love the States, and I'm lucky enough to travel and visit different universities in different states. And I'm always amazed. Wow. I mean, wow, the amount of diversity, the amount of different mountains that we have, rivers that we have, people, just really kind people. And it's just I'm really in love with this country, and I think it's an honor and it's a responsibility to really continue to build this country, to build it on the principles that it was built on, which is really, freedom of of making your dreams come true. So that is still applicable to this day. So for my international students, if you have a yes, let's make it happen.
Hmm. Great. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Yasiara Ortiz from MissStudy. And you can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT and CLT courses by going to achievable.me and be sure to use the code podcast to get 10% off if you like it.